volume talking, I would be super happy with the amount of compression I have with it. Because then if I get loud for just a second, it's okay. It kept that in check. Whereas if I turn that off and have that just moment, that just got a little bit aggressive in here. And so using that compressor just to take the top off, so that when I get loud, I can get loud for a second, but it's not going to be so crazy that it's going to just cut my head off.
Then you get those, with people that use the microphone itself as self-controlled dynamics. They've got it up here and then they pull it back and they do that American Idol / gospel thing, you know?
Yeah, and that's a hard one to know, and I try to just coach people to just keep the mic more constant. Now, some people can do that well. Yeah. There are a small handful of people who can do that well. And they'll back off the mic a little bit when they want to be off the mic a little bit, and they'll get back in the microphone when they want to get back in the microphone.
Really observant people that actually listen.
Yeah, and just some people know what they're going for there, and some people overdo that, and it gets way too dramatic. And so that's something that's usually a coaching thing. I always like to make the joke with audio that we definitely can't polish a turd. Like, if what I'm getting is bad from the stage, I'm not going to be able to make it great here.
All right.
It's exactly. So I always but I also hate in so many churches that I walked into where, like, there's this big line of division between the people who are back here and the people out there. And, like, obviously that it's one team. Like, I legitimately like to coach people, like, when you're sitting in this seat, you are literally another member of the band. Because you're taking the hard work that those people on stage have put in practicing and preparing to do this, and now you're trying to go piece that together. In the live audio world, like in the concert world and touring bands and stuff like that, and what's funny is most people who are audio engineers are musicians. They are musicians themselves. I know, like, in church that tends to not be the case a lot of times. Now sometimes you do, but a lot of times you have the people who are more technology inclined that become the ones who are the sound people because they understand the technology. But what's more important than anything, more important than technology, is understanding music. And so I have to have a grasp of what's actually happening on that stage and what they're putting together, and know how to kind of piece those things together to sound right. And so this is where I'm going to harp on you for a second, that if you're not listening to and preparing the same way that musicians are to know those songs well, if you don't know the songs just as well as they do, then you're doing them a disservice, because they've come in and practiced and prepared with Mitch giving them a vision of, like, here's what this song is supposed to sound like, and they're coming in here and working hard to try and achieve that. And if you're just turning faders up without having a clue of what's this song supposed to sound like, you're doing them a disservice, because you should know what it is that is the end goal and be working toward that. I always love training musicians to mix because they know what it's supposed to sound like, and I just have to teach them the tools. But I also love teaching people because I'm the kid who was not a musician. Like, I did not come the path of being the music person. I was the technology-oriented middle school kid who was annoying the snot out of the people at the church I grew up at and asked too many questions. And that's how I ended up here, is I came the other path. Now, I have a passion for music, and I love music. Now, I'm not a player. I'm not going to get off the stage and play. But I can have a conversation with a musician. I can talk music. I can't talk advanced music theory, but I can talk music with people to the point where they know that I get what they're going for. And that's a huge thing that you can do to serve them well, is to know the music. And so make it part of your routine that during the week, I assume you guys use Planning Center?
Yeah.
Great. You put the songs up on Planning Center?
Yes.
Great. Go listen to the songs.
Usually.
Go get to know the songs so that you know what the goal is. And that gives you then the idea that when you're sitting here, you're working toward that the same way they are, to the point where you can at some point have a conversation with them and say, hey, I think nobody's playing this part that's in the song. But sometimes you gotta have that. Sometimes it ends up being that kind of thing of like, hey, so nobody's playing like the lead line here that feels like it's missing something. Could somebody play that? And sometimes like this position becomes one where you're actually speaking into that. And it's not like you're telling them what to do, but it's a conversation. So being aware of what's happening on stage and being like making that part of what you're doing is a huge piece of doing this job well. Is knowing that this is an instrument. Okay, I'll get off that soapbox for a minute. Okay, back to compression for a second. So again, we really only talked about threshold and ratio. Now some of these are going to be very similar from what we looked at on the gate, but these are kind of my time-related parameters. So I've got attack and release. So again, once the signal crosses the threshold, how quickly do we want to actually start compressing it? The release is once I've passed back below the threshold, how long do I want to wait before I give that gain back? Or how quickly do I want that gain to come back? I don't have that hold period here like I do in a gate where I can just say, just wait and don't do anything. Release will start immediately, but I can adjust how long that release takes. Then the last one, or next to last one, is this one that says outgain, and I kind of hate that knob exists because it becomes for too many people a bad habit. Usually, so like what I talked about at the beginning about gain, I want to get that input signal up to a nice level, a nice mixable level. And what outgain is essentially says, if you've compressed the signal, and now once the signal is quieter, if you need more gain to actually get it up where you need it to sit in the mix, you can turn that gain back up. But I would tell you two things are wrong with that. You either didn't have enough gain at your preamp when you started, and so now once you've compressed it, you're running out of fader to be able to get that where you want it to be. So that's problem number one. Or you've compressed it so hard that you've taken all the volume out of it, and now you need more volume. And so I never use outgain. I like to, it's one of those things where it's like, if I just have plenty of input signal coming in, and then I compress it a little bit, I'm not gonna get to the place where I feel like I have to go compensate with more gain. So I kind of hate that it exists, but it's there. Again, all these are rules of thumb things. There are times where I want to go intentionally really compress the snot out of something for a sound on purpose, and I want to make a sound compressed on purpose, and that might be the only case where I would use that. Okay, the last one's the knee. You'll watch like as this line represents what's happening to that signal over as it crosses over volume. So you can see that basically once I hit my threshold, it's starting to like show that reduction in volume rather than the signal being linear. So I set my ratio to 1:1. That line is straight because there's not going to ever be a change. So as I start increasing that ratio, I see like how much volume is going to get removed as my signal gets louder. You'll also see that the knee is basically that little joint right in the middle of it. And so I can go anywhere from like a really hard knee of how it transitions into it, small, but like, and it's one of those things that like, I've been doing this my whole life and I don't always feel like I can even hear a difference in the knee, but sometimes I feel like I can, and I tinker with it. But it's like, it's just basically the entry point and how much you want to smooth the entry into the compression. So it defaults to 2, which is great and is a little bit gentle. Sometimes I'll soften it up just a little bit more if I want to have something that really kind of gingerly works its way into the compression. So it's just adjusting, flattening that ratio, so rather than being like a square of that ratio kicking in at that threshold, it softens the entry into that compression.
So you're just kind of sort of adjusting the curve, if you will.
Exactly. It's just adjusting the curve as that compressor starts. Because if it was really linear, you'd have a hard knee, what's what that called here, where it's literally, okay, well now the compressor's on, and I've crossed that threshold, so it's going to do this. And this says, let's soften that ratio just a little bit as it's first starting, so that I don't hear the compressor engage quite right away. And so I can stretch that knee out a little bit and really soften how much it's going to engage that. But where it starts on this console on 2 sounds really good, and I rarely feel like I have to soften it a bit from there.
So that's where the dual compressors could come in if you want to put
Yes.
a second curve in there.
You could have the second one be harder and have it hit a little faster. So when they hit that one, I really want to jump in and happen. So that's absolutely a valid point there. So that's compression. That's the whole thing. Now there is also the whole key-in thing where I can choose another signal. So I can actually make this mic be compressed off the signal from another mic. Not a lot of cases where I want to do that, but it's something you can do. So it's a function that you'll probably never touch. But